The question that we posed in the previous video was, how can we get rid of the prisoner's dilemma? So how can Target and how can Walmart sort of make this outcome sustainable for both of the companies, where both of them receive $100 million in revenue rather than the Nash equilibrium value of $50 million for each of the firms? And the easiest way to go ahead and take a look at this is to make the usage of some type of repeated game and the use of trigger strategies. So in any game that we talked about so far, this was just a one-shot game. So the game that we see right here was just played one time, and if the game is played one time, everything's going to go back to the prisoner's dilemma Nash equilibrium. But if we open this up just a little bit and let the game be repeated, not just once, but maybe twice, 3 times, 100 times, an infinite amount of times, then we can actually make this outcome right here more sustainable for both of the firms. So here, repeated games are games that can be endlessly repeated or repeated for a specific number of rounds, and they lead to different types of strategies that take into account past behavior of rivals. So not only do you have to think about what the rival did previously, but you have to think about what the rival did the year before that, or the time period before that, going all the way back, so you two actually have a history with one another. And when you two have a history with one another, when both of the players know exactly what the other player is going to do, you can go ahead and make the use of these trigger strategies. Strategies are actions contingent on the other player's past decisions. So repeated games and these trigger strategies are one way to help get us out of this prisoner's dilemma, or to get the best outcome for both of these players. So that was the question that we wanted to ask and answer. So how to get the best in this instance is going to be the cooperative outcome, meaning that, hey, we're talking with one another in order to get the best outcome for each of us. So the best outcome in prisoner's dilemma. And we said that one of the ways in order to achieve the best outcome is to use repeated games and the use of trigger strategies. Repeated games, and trigger strategies. And this is going to help allow to make the cooperative outcome become a little bit more sustainable. So 3 types of trigger strategies that we go ahead and take a look at. There's the tit for tat, there's a grim trigger, and the trembling hand theory. So tit for tat, grim trigger, trembling hand, they're all sort of connected with one another, but they all make usage of past behavior in order to dictate what should be happening next. So let's go ahead, detail each one of these, and see how that's going to play with our Walmart and Target example right here. So here, first trigger strategy is something known as tit for tat. So tit for tat strategy. And like the name implies, it just tells us that you're going to reward cooperation and punish defection. You do exactly what your rival did in the previous period. So this is a trigger strategy that rewards cooperation, and punishes defection. So your rival does something good, you say, I'll cooperate with you. Your rival does something bad, you're going to say, hey, I hate you. I'm going to deviate from our current plan, or I'm going to punish you in some way. So going back to our Target and Walmart example, suppose that in the current period, say year number 0, both of them are advertising lightly, so they're each achieving the best outcome. However, in the next year, year number 1, Target decides to deviate from the plan and advertises heavy, while Walmart advertises light, keeping in line with the best outcome. So therefore, Target gets 120, while Walmart gets 30. If Walmart were practicing a tit for tat strategy in the period after that, in year number 2, Walmart would want to go ahead and advertise heavy in order to punish Target what they did in the previous period, and Target would probably go back to advertising light, so they just get that one-time gain. So in year number 2, we end up in this outcome where Target gets 30 and Walmart gets 120. And then finally, in the last period, year number 3, everything goes back to normal, where each Target and Walmart are achieving the best cooperative outcome once again. So Walmart practicing a tit for tat strategy. If Target does something good, they're going to go ahead and do good as well. But if Target does something bad, they're going to go ahead and punish that. Next, we take a look at the second type of strategy, which is a more sort of permanent type of tit for tat strategy. So it's a grim trigger strategy. Grim trigger strategy. And the Grim Trigger strategy says, hey, if you screw with me once, I'm going to punish you forever. So I hate you forever if you wrong me once. That's basically what this says. So any decision by your opponent, to defect or to cheat is met with permanent retaliatory decision. Forever. So it doesn't matter what you do to signal that you want to get on their good side. It doesn't matter. They're always going to punish you no matter what. So once again, go back to our Target and Walmart example. Suppose in year number 0, our current time period, we're at this point right here, both of them receiving 100. Target, once again, decides in year number 1, the next time period, to cheat. They advertise heavy. Walmart advertises light, so we end up in this box. What happens in the next period? Walmart is going to advertise heavy. Target advertises light, so we end up in this outcome. And it doesn't really matter what Target does for the periods after this. Walmart is always going to advertise heavy. If Target advertises heavy, Walmart advertises heavy. If Target advertises light to signal that they want to go back to this outcome, there's no chance of that happening if Walmart is advertising or following a Grim Trigger strategy. Walmart says, hey, you screwed with me once, I'm going to punish you forever. So therefore, we end up at the prisoner's dilemma, Nash equilibrium in the long run. And then finally, the last type of trigger strategy that we can take a look at is something known as the trembling hand trigger. Trembling hand trigger. And the trembling hand trigger just tells us that, hey, what happens if you make a mistake? So it allows for a mistake by your opponent before you retaliate. Allows for a mistake by your opponent before you retaliate. And once you retaliate, you can either follow the Tit-for-Tat strategy or the Grim Trigger strategy. So it allows for a one-time mistake. So let's go back. What happens if Walmart's going to be sort of following a trembling hand trigger type of strategy? So year number 0, current time period, we're at the cooperative outcome. Target decides to cheat once again. They go to 120 and 30 for Walmart. And what happens in the next period? Well, if Target decides to go back to advertising light, we end up at the cooperative outcome, the best outcome once again. And Walmart says, okay, maybe Target advertising heavy one time was a mistake, so we'll let this slide. But what happens if Target decides to cheat again in the next period? Then that's where Walmart may go ahead and say, okay, we know that this wasn't a mistake, so let's go ahead and follow the tit-for-tat strategy. We'll punish Target, or we can go ahead and just go out on the full Grim Trigger strategy and say, hey, you cheated on us too many times. We know it's not a mistake. And that's where Walmart would go ahead and advertise heavy for forever how many time periods we take a look at this game. But as we can see right here, by opening up the game to repeated games and using these trigger strategies, it makes the cooperative or the best outcome just a little bit more sustainable than just the one-shot game where we'll always go to the Nash equilibrium prisoner's dilemma here. So once again, just adding a little bit more complexity into the simultaneous move games that we have right here, but with the usage of repeated games and these trigger strategies, just to make the strategies just a little bit more complex and to add a little bit more realism to it. Another way that we can actually get rid of the prisoner's dilemma or try to see if it leads us to a different solution is to go ahead and model this as a sequential move game. So what happens if Target moves first and then Walmart moves right after it? Or what happens if Walmart moves first, then Target moves right after that firm? So these sequential move games, they're going to be modeled very differently compared to the simultaneous move games, and that's exactly where we're going to see a few examples in our next section.